this was about as bizarre and as easy as it gets.
So the number for me was a number that would allow me to never have to work again.
I feel like we got top.
I went from a sale of $500,000 to in debt.
$192 million.
This is Built to Sell Radio with your host, John Warlow.
You know, the subtitle for my book, Built to Sell, is called Creating a Business That Can Thrive Without You. Why? Because I think that's the ultimate poker hand in the game of life. If you've got a business that can succeed without you doing all the work, you've got lots of options, right? You could sell it, you could bring in a manager, you could sell part of it, lots of options. And I think the prerequisite for building a business that can thrive without you is having standard operating procedures. Having a set of guidelines where you can delegate your most important tasks and projects to your team and have them do them just as well as you would do them. We've just developed a brand new ebook, and you can get a free copy at builttosell.com/SOP. It will give you the instructions for creating SOPs. It'll tell you what to document, the difference between auditory learners and visual learners and kinetic learners, and how you can make sure your SOPs relate to all those different types of individuals. Again, go to builttosell.com/SOP to download a free copy of the ebook. Next up is Justin Adams from Digitize.AI. Kind of a complicated business, but Justin does a great job in the intro of explaining it in layman's terms. So I won't talk about what it is here. What I want you to take away from this interview was, in particular, if you're a service company and you're interested in transitioning it into a product or a software company, listen to what Justin did to protect his IP, intellectual property, so that when he was successful making the shift, he, not his consulting clients, own the IP. It's a little nuance, but I think it's important that you protect your IP up front, in particular if your aspiration is to turn your company into a product business. He talks a lot about how to increase the likelihood of your success, your idea becoming a success. So have a listen for that. He talks about why myopically trying to hang on to 50% of your equity may actually be a mistake, which is interesting. He talks about some benchmarks for valuation around software companies and how those are different than service businesses. Just lots of takeaways and great insight from Justin Adams. Enjoy. Justin Adams, welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
Thank you, John.
Tell me about Digitize.AI. And I got to tell you, I read the press release and I'm still confused. So you got to break it down for me in layman's terms. What on earth did you guys do?
Well, we found a process in healthcare that sits in the CFO function that if you, in the US, if you need certain medical procedures, let's say you need to have a knee surgery, the hospital or the doctor's office has to ask your insurance company ahead of time in order to get authorizations to reimburse for that procedure. And what we discovered is that was a very manual process, meaning there's a team of folks usually at these large hospitals that are manually calling insurance company lines, waiting for 2 hours to get an answer, or, some have online access, but even that's a very manual process. And so what we did is we built a piece of software that helped facilitate that transaction, really saving hospitals and patients time getting approvals for their medical procedures.
Okay, so if I'm in the bowels of some hospital in the billing department, and I'm like, Mr. Jones wants to get a knee replacement, I need to know if Mr. Jones is good for the cash, right? Like,
correct.
And so I need to know that if we're going to effectively finance the surgery, that I'm going to get my money from the insurance company. Now, why isn't Mr. Jones on the hook to figure that out himself?
That's a good question. I think because the process is so complex, most people, myself included, I've dealt with this with my family. Trying to navigate it is extremely, difficult. And so the hospital at the end of the day is, once they approve it, they're going to be on the hook. Sometimes they might have Mr. Jones sign a waiver that he's on the hook. It just depends on the hospital. But you can imagine there's a bit of gamesmanship involved. Insurance companies, it's really a zero-sum game when you think about it. They take in a pot of money, and their profit is whatever they don't pay out of that pot of money at the end of the day. So there's not necessarily an incentive to make that a easy experience for them to pay out of their pot of money.
Got it. Okay. So the hospitals were the ones, like, what was the business model? Were you selling it to the hospitals?
Correct. So we were selling into the CFOs of these hospitals.
Got it. I mean, it must have been like shooting fish in a barrel in a way. Like, was it easy to get them signed up, or were there objections that you ran into?
Selling into large hospital systems is a long sales process. Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting about it is most businesses, if you can show someone a 2 or 3 times efficiency gain, it's a no-brainer. Hospitals have so many areas for efficiency gains that a lot of times they could say, yeah, that's a 3x gain for us, but we've got a dozen things over here that are 5 or 10x gains. And so they're going to prioritize that instead. So it's actually a very difficult and long sales process selling into these large systems.
How did you get into this? I mean, like, were you a CFO at a hospital? Like, how did you stumble into this opportunity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I had developed a back office automation expertise when I was at PwC. I set up
the big accounting firm,
the big accounting firm, exactly.
Consulting firm. Yeah,
exactly. One of the big 4. And I had helped set up a center of excellence around automating back office finance functions. So, think HR, finance, etc. And so when I started Digitize.AI, it was really a hammer looking for a nail. So it had this capability, but didn't know what the use case was going to be. And was fortunate to be introduced to a hospital CFO. And really the question was, if you had a magic wand, what's the process that you have to do today that you would love to have it be automated? And this was the answer, was around prior authorizations. And so the thinking was, if this is a pain for one large hospital system, there's a good chance that it's going to be a pain for others. And so that kind of started us on this journey.
And did you have the technical chops to build this out, or did you have a co-founder, or how did you kind of do the technical side of things?
Yeah, so I had technical co-founder. A couple co-founders started this with me, and so we grew from there.
How did you guys deal with the equity piece? Because I'm always fascinated. So some technical founders think the product is the solution, right? Like, if you can build a great product, it'll sell itself. The old Kevin Costner, if you build it, they will come sort of idea. So they're like, I want all the equity, right? You sales guys, business guys, I mean, you're just blowhards. The sales guys, the business guys are like, or gals are like, no, nothing sells. It's like, nothing matters until you make a sale. Anybody can make a product. So how did you guys deal with the whole decision to split the equity piece?
Yeah, what we did is really what we looked at was risk and the amount of risk that we took starting the business. So for example, when I started the company, my wife and I went at it full time looking to raise some angel funding for about 6 months before we got that funding in the door, and so we had no income. We burned all our cash savings. It got to the point where our dryer broke and we didn't have the money to fix it. And so my wife was hanging clothes on a clothesline in our backyard.
Seriously?
Yeah. So we put everything we had into getting the company off the ground. And so the co-founders that I brought on, once I had funded the business, I had de-risked it, in a lot of ways for them, where we had enough funding to last. And so, tried to negotiate a fair split. And once we exited, it was more than fair in terms of the upside that they received, for the work.
And so, how did you raise money for this idea?
Well, I had some friends that had done well in I live in Charlotte, which is a banking town, real estate town. And so I had some friends that had done well in banking and real estate, and basically said, we'll back you if you start something. We believe in you and kind of the skill set you have. And so that was really the two of them was not enough to get it going, but it was the foundation to start, looking for additional capital. And so, it was a classic put together a pitch deck and figure out terms and go around. And that was the 6 months, because it wasn't just identifying folks. That there's a long lag between when they say yes, we'll back you, to agreeing to the legal terms, to the money being wired, and finally hitting the bank. And so, meanwhile, what maybe a month or two doesn't seem like a big deal to someone who's wiring money to an entrepreneur, but when an entrepreneur is watching their life savings go down to zero quickly, you can imagine how stressful every day is, wondering if those funds are going to come through.
What was that like for your relationship with your wife?
That's a great question. She's been my biggest supporter from day one, and she'll tell you, even when we were dating, when we met, she knew I was going to do this at someday. She didn't know it was going to be a decade after we were married. But if it wasn't for her honestly pushing me, I don't think I would have. I had a good, stable job. I had benefits. I would dip a toe off the cliff, and really it was her support of pushing me kind of off the cliff to take the plunge. And I tell entrepreneurs all the time that want to start their own thing, if your spouse isn't supportive, don't even bother, because it's so hard as it is, that if you have that friction on the home front, I just don't know how it's possible to do that.
This is pretty crazy, because PwC is like a big company. It's a brand name institution. It's kind of got badge value on your resume. Like it's a great kind of gig, right? And partner track is pretty exciting. Your spouse gave up her work as well to come work with you on this idea, presumably.
Correct.
And you gave up that steady, and got to a point where the dryer broken and you guys didn't have the cash. That's crazy.
Yeah. And I had started, the itch to be an entrepreneur was so strong. I had started 2 other businesses on the side during nights and weekends, coding with co-founders, and both of them got to a working product, and I didn't see there was concerns about going for it, right, with each of them. One, we built an application that I said, boy, I think LinkedIn's going to really get into the space and they'll eat our lunch. And so I didn't, quit to go after that one. Sure enough, 6 months later, LinkedIn did exactly what I was, so it was a good thing. So this wasn't just to wake up one day and, decide to start a company. It was a constant evolution of learning and de-risking, so that when the time came, you set yourself up for the best chance of success. But there's no way to fully de-risk it, right? You have to just take the plunge to, again, if I think you can do so much during nights and weekends, but at some point, you think you have to burn the ships, so to speak, behind you, and have no other alternative options, because what it takes to get there is just so great that if you have a lifeline, chances are you're going to probably use it at some point.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm a big fan of the burn the ships analogy, and how important that is to ultimately kind of, what's that? Necessity is the mother of invention. That's an old expression that I think rings true for sure. How important was it for you to maintain at least 50% of the equity? I know for a lot of founders that is almost psychologically important, that they don't give up. And you could do different classes of shares so you can control the company. Was that something that you were focused on, because you had to raise some money from outside? You had some co-founders. Like, was hanging on to at least half like a big priority for you?
It's interesting. So yes, it was with that one, and now I have a new company, and right off the gate, I have less than 50% because I shared a lot more equity the second time around. So I have perspective on both sides of that.
Yeah, what's your perspective?
Equation. Well, I think there's pros and cons, right? The pro is that you have control, and if you think that you're the right person to have control, you're not going to lose that if you have over 50. The con is that there's the benefit, the psychological benefit of having control also can be a psychological weight that's on your shoulders. So even if you have other co-founders that have equity, but you feel like you're still controlling the company, you carry around this burden that is, the heavy is the crown that wears, or heavy is the head that wears the crown kind of quote. It's just lonely. And so that loneliness and that burden to feel like you've got to make it success if it's all on you, that's just difficult. I mean, that's just a difficult thing to do for a long time. And so, with the new one, for me, it was important that, I brought in there's 5 co-founders kind of total, and, pretty equal equity split this time around. It really just to spread that burden and that weight. And so obviously you're giving up some upside, but if you're trying to build something for scale long term, that's not necessarily a bad thing to have a smaller piece of something much larger versus a bigger piece of something smaller.
Yeah, I saw the big $14 million round that you guys just closed, which congratulations. That's
thank
incredible.
You.
Yeah. So let's get back to Andrew in a minute. I want to talk a little bit about Andrew, but first let's finish up on Digitize.AI. So I get sort of how you finance. So a couple of angels, you had some co-founders. This was 2017, as I understand it, when you started to commercialize the idea, right?
Correct.
Got it. And you sold in 2019.
Correct. It was about a 2-year run.
Okay. So that begs the question, well, what on earth did you do in 24 months to go from idea conception to selling it to, private equity back? What did you do in those 2 years?
Besides working 100-hour weeks and ignoring, family and friends, I mean, it was a great outcome, but there was a sacrifice involved. And I'm very honest and open when I talk to folks about that I was not a good father. I wasn't a good husband. I wasn't a good friend during that period because I was so focused on building the company. So, I think a lot of times people look at the success, which is great, but they don't examine the flip side of that and sometimes of what's required of that. And so, there was a toll that it took, and just being so focused on the company. I can't remember a single night probably during that 2-year period where I slept through the night and didn't wake up thinking about the company. So, I mean, it was a maniacal kind of focus that was required to do that. And so, we, in a lot of ways, we did a lot of things right. We got lucky in some areas, and there's always a combination of, luck and skill involved, I think, with some of the stuff.
But what practically did you do? Take it down from 30,000 feet, worked hard to 500 feet. Like, practically, did you win your first hospital? Did you daisy chain that into a second? Like, how did you get from 0 to?
Yeah. So we were hustling to take any kind of revenue we can get. So we had clients that were university systems we had a baby stroller company that we were doing work for. We were doing AI projects on the side. So we were hustling to get cash flow is the lifeblood, right? I mean, you can't once you run out of cash, you're in a tough situation. So I think one of the biggest compliments I received from the acquirer down the road was, he said, you ran that software company like a one-man Subway shop. You knew every, penny that was coming in and out. And that really was the case. And so we were hustling to get revenue wherever we could as we kind of, we had angels, but it wasn't enough for us to just build the product and not focus on sales. And so we use that as a way to almost kind of bridge while we built our product in the hospital system. And so, yes, then we landed one pretty well-known hospital system, which gave us credibility. Like a lot of industries, if you get a name brand, you have credibility to then kind of go in and parlay that into other places. And so that's, that was the route that we started going down.
Got it. And did that hospital pay you up front, or did they want 60 days, or is it SaaS, or because that would have been a lot to fulfill that first hospital's order, I'm assuming.
Yeah. So it started as a consulting engagement and then turned into kind of a SaaS model after that. And so again, consulting is great because you get the cash up front. The revenues on exit for consulting versus SaaS are very different. And so, we were always longer term focused on, our SaaS model, because we knew that was the way to get the valuation upon exit that we wanted.
How did you deal with the IP, intellectual property of the consulting? Because usually when you hire a consultant, oftentimes the IP is owned by the person, doing the hiring. In other words, the hospital. Did you guys preempt that through your terms, or what? How did you deal with
Yeah,
the IP?
that was from day one. We were just 100% focused on making sure we protected IP rights, because again, if you don't have IP rights as a software company, you're going to be in a world apart. And so, we were doing provisional patent applications for some of the software we were building. All of our contracts made sure that 100%, of the IP was maintained by Digitize.AI. So yeah, that was a focus from day one, because you're right, especially when you're dealing with university systems and healthcare systems, it's pretty easy for that IP stuff to get intertwined. And if it does, you're, like I said, you're trying to sell it, because you think about a potential acquirer, right? They don't want any potential litigation down the road around IP. And so you've got to, from day one, just be really focused on having a good IP lawyer, and setting that stuff up from the start. One of the lessons I learned that was helpful for me was, even at the time where you maybe don't think you can afford it, getting things set up the right way, legally and everything else, just prevents so much issues down the road. So I'm a big fan of over-investing in, setting up the structure, legal, and everything else as optimal as you can from the get-go, because it may seem like a big investment at the time, but if you look at down the road and kind of second order effects that can come from not doing that, the ROI, I think, tends to be pretty high.
No wonder you couldn't get the dryer fixed. You're spending it all on the damn lawyers.
Exactly. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So you protected your right. Did you get pushback from the hospitals, from that first hospital, when you showed them the contract and they're like, no, we're not giving you the IP? I mean, did you get that pushback?
No, I think we kind of set the stage from the gate that was the way it was going to be. So it wasn't even a discussion point, right? In terms of there are certain things that I found when you're negotiating that you can have leeway on, and certain things that's just, you have to be willing to risk losing a deal over. And to me, that was just one of the things you would walk away from a deal from, if that was, became an issue.
I'm glad you raised valuation, because in the difference between a service company, consulting company valuation, and a SaaS company, software as a service company valuation. At that time, what were you thinking a consulting company might trade for in terms of a multiple, and what were you envisioning a SaaS company might be able to get?
Yeah,
in terms of a multiple.
Yeah, and I was with a consulting company that PwC acquired, so I actually knew the valuation, the multiple that got traded at. And so, I think a good rule of thumb for service kind of consulting, especially management consulting, traditionally it's been about 1x revenue. It's crept, if there's some IP and brand, it's crept up closer to 2. So I think 1 to 2x revenue, it tends to be what you're seeing for consulting businesses at 2017 and today. For a SaaS business, and it's only gone up, but at that time, you're probably looking at 15 to 25 times multiple on the revenue. So you're looking at a 7 to 12x difference from a consulting business. So again, that you can imagine why transitioning to a SaaS business was really important for us.
Got it. What triggered you to want to sell so early? Because again, you started in 2017, you got your first hospital. What triggered the decision to sell in 2019?
I'd say there are 2 primary causes. One was just on the personal front, the level of stress and strain that myself and the co-founding team, I think, were feeling working the type of, how hard we had to hustle during those 2 years to get to that point. We really we're at the inflection point where we had to raise institutional capital if we wanted to keep going at that point.
What does that mean, institutional capital? For folks who don't understand that,
Yeah.
I think of like a government body when I think of the word institution.
Yeah, it means venture capital firms that are, have angels that can be friends or family. It means they're writing money out of their checking account or savings that as an investment. But then you have firms like venture capital firms or private equity firms, and they basically manage other people's money. So the large endowments, California pension fund will put 20% of their endowment into venture capital, for example, because they have longer time horizons. The money's locked up for 10 to 15 years, but the return's usually higher than what you can get in the stock market or in a savings account. And so you have venture capital and private equity firms that have exploded really in the last decade, managing these other people's money that make investments for long term. Not if you look at someone, a company, and you say, I'm losing, $500,000 a month, sign me, write me a check that values it. Most people are going to think you're crazy. But if your time horizon is long enough, I think Amazon didn't make any profit for 20 plus years, right? But they were building this money cannon that they could flip the switch at some point. And so, if your time horizon as an investor is long enough, you can make these bets that over time, these unprofitable software companies, especially, will start to turn a profit. And so we had competitors in the space that were raising $100 million of venture capital funding. And so that was the second part, in addition to kind of on the personal side, in order to compete, continue to compete and grow, we knew we'd have to raise not just 5 or 10 million, more like 100 million. And you're signing up for when you take that amount of money, you're signing up for a long road to be able to build and exit that. And so I think that was the inflection point that the co-founders and I, looked at each other, are we ready to prepare to be in this for another 5 to 10 years, or do we kind of, basically say, now is a good point to exit and we'll live to fight another day, so to speak. And so I think that was the route that as a group we decided on. And it was really unanimous. It wasn't me making the decision. It was definitely everyone kind of, I think, feeling the same thing at that point. So that made it a little bit easier, because I think if there was if we were not aligned to sell, I think that would have been more difficult to move forward with that.
What about the outside investors? I mean, what was their comfort level with you selling at that early stage?
Yeah, they made many multiples on their money, so they were very happy to have that that quickly in 2 years. So every investor I had for that last company, invested and put more in this time around. So they were obviously pleased with the results.
Got it. So take me on the journey. So you decide with the group, there's a lot of other competitors raising a bunch of money. Maybe now's the time. Was there an inbound inquiry that made you start getting on your front foot and start, the process, or what happened next? Did you market the business? Did you hire a broker? Like, how did you start the process?
Yeah, we had built relationships with a lot of different healthcare technology companies, because we had a skill set that a lot of the legacy companies did not have at that time. And so I would say we probably started talking to companies more about strategic funding. So a larger company putting money into our business more so than an acquisition. But once those conversations started and you're going through that process, word tends to spread a little bit, especially some of these industries. Most of the folks kind of know the other folks, and so we just got to know a lot of different companies and build relationships at trade shows and things like that. Back in the day when you could travel and meet in person, And then we had some friends of the company that were investment bankers who, said, hey, if you're talking to so-and-so and so-and-so, maybe, this other person that would be interested. And so we did not hire an investment bank. We did not run a formal process. But, I decided to kind of run a process myself where, at one point, maybe we had 10 companies talking to us. And I said, okay, well, if you're serious about it by this date, I need a, indication that you're serious. And then, kind of winnow it down to letters of intent and things like that. And so really that was I ran kind of what investment banks typically do, in terms of running a process. I did that myself. And I think it was really, for me, it was important for me to understand the process and to not outsource it, because, I was intellectually curious about it, but then again, there's, really digging in on the details was important to me. And so that's not the right answer for everyone. It really depends on the stage of the business and, how much inbound interest there is versus having to kind of gin up external interest. So, I mean, that's a very personal, decision, I think, for every business. But for us at that time, I think that was the right decision.
Got it. And so how many on your long lists? I know you asked them to come up with like an indication of interest, but kind of go up a step for me. Like how many companies were there that you thought that you had sort of initial conversations with?
Probably about a dozen.
Okay. And of those, how many expressed, like submitted some sort of indication of interest?
Probably about 5.
Okay. And how many of the 5 converted into letters of intent, like offers effectively?
Yeah, I think we had, so a lot of times with the letters of intent, you get exclusivity with that. And so you kind of have to do pre-letters of intent where you're negotiating numbers before you get the letter of intent. Because if you get the letter of intent and you sign it, then, so I'd say there was probably 3 to 4 firms at the time where I was exchanging figures with. And then obviously, high, for me, doing things the right, high character is important to me. And so I was very serious about when I was going to sign a letter of intent that it was going to be exclusive. I wasn't going to be talking to, so that I took that very seriously. And so, that was, now obviously as a seller, you try to limit the length of how long you have exclusivity for, right? Buyers are going to want as much exclusivity as as they can get. And you're going to, as a seller, want to keep that as short as you can. So there's that's part of the negotiation as well. It's not just dollar amounts. There's also timing around the deal close and all that kind of good stuff. So
let me just pull up and talk to my listeners for a second. So what Justin's describing is the typical process in an M&A deal where there's a letter of intent that includes a no shop clause. And once you sign that gives the acquirer usually 30, 60, 90 days to do their due diligence. During that time, you're starting to lose negotiating leverage and the other buyers sort of go away. And so the longer the period of due diligence, the worse off for you as a seller. And so what Justin's describing is doing a great job negotiating a shorter exclusivity period so that he's kind of holding the acquirer's feet to the fire a little bit to make sure they close and that he doesn't lose interest in the other folks. Am I getting that?
Yeah,
right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. No, that's absolutely right. But there's also the reality of you're still running a business at the same, running and trying to grow a business. And so there's a distraction involved with the sales process that, you don't want to go through it, not have a deal, and then have your business suffer on the back end of it. So, that's the tremendous kind of strain as you're going through this is still running the business day to day, still trying to grow it and doing this. So it's really, you're doing at least 2 full-time jobs going through this process.
How short were you able to get the exclusivity agreement down to? Like how many days did you get it limited to?
I don't remember exactly. I want to say it was around 60.
Yeah.
So I think maybe the initial ask was 90 and it got down to 60. I don't remember exactly off the top of my head, but that feels about right to me.
That sounds about right. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. What was the range in? I know we were going to talk kind of multiple ranges, if we can. How did what was your reaction to the three offers? I think you mentioned of the five that you were sort of serious about, three or four of them came forward with some sort of offer. Like what were those offers like in terms of multiple of revenue? Like what was the range, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting looking back on it. In a lot of ways, the ranges were a reflection on the acquiring company's core business, meaning some of the companies were more service-based and they were wanting to get into software, but the multiple were maybe lower than an all software business. So there's almost an all software business or predominantly software business, which Waystar is the vision is to build end-to-end software to automate the entire revenue cycle. We were just doing one very small piece of that. There's a comfort level, I think, because maybe they're receiving that multiple themselves versus a company that's, let's say, 50% services, 50% software, which makes sense. I'm sure there's different costs of capital, right, for those businesses and all that. And so reflecting back on it, you can almost line up the differences, multiples based on probably the multiple that the acquiring company was receiving themselves.
Got it. Yeah. So reading between the lines, a big professional services company may trade at 1 or 2 times revenue. So when they see a software company, they're like, I'm not paying some outlandish number. Yet a pure play software company who itself is being valued on a multiple of revenue, like a high multiple of revenue, is much more comfortable with those sorts of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's say a software company or a services company that's half services, half software, and this is too simplistic, but let's say services is 1x and software is 20x. Maybe they're getting valued at 10x themselves, right? You put those two together at 50-50 revenue versus an all software company, is 20x. And so they may be saying, okay, we're 10x ourselves, you're all software, maybe we'll get you 12, 13x versus a software company saying, okay, we're 20x ourselves, so we're comfortable giving 20x from a acquisition perspective.
And I don't know if you can share, but the offers that you got from pure play software companies, were they in that sort of 15 to 20 range as a multiple of revenue?
Yeah, they were. I mean, they were, I would say, within industry standard range, and that was obviously, we had optionality as a business. We could have continued to grow a lot of ways. So selling below, market didn't make, for us, the best alternative to a sale was just to, raise money and kind of continue on. So we were not in a place where we had to sell. And so obviously from a leverage perspective, that helps, right? If you're in a position where you've got to sell no matter what the offer is, then you're obviously in a different position.
Sure. Of those 5 that you got sort of serious about and started exchanging numbers, of those 5 companies, what proportion were really talking to you about an investment in the company, but having you continue to run it versus an outright acquisition?
That's a good question. I would say it's probably split,
Okay.
probably half and half. And obviously sale price is important, but there's also a much large, it's part of a larger equation where you have a team and you're thinking about, is this going to be a good home for the team? Is this is there good values and culture match and fit? All those type of kind of questions are at least were going through my mind, because it's important for me to look at the larger picture and not just sell to the highest bidder.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful for sure. So in terms of, I think people would be interesting. So it's an interesting, we've had a lot of guests on the show where they start out under the auspices of looking to find a strategic investor effectively. And sometimes it's a veil, like they're actually looking to be acquired, but they're saying they want strategic investment, and lo and behold, they get acquisition offers. Other times it's genuine. They want a strategic investor, and the investor sort of turns the tables on them and says, well, actually, we'd like to buy you outright. I'd be curious in your case, like what happened that, like, how did the idea of an outright acquisition come up in conversation?
Yeah, I would say, for us, it was organic, where we really were looking for a strategic investor to begin with. And over time, the idea of an outright acquisition started to sound better to the team. And so it flipped right in our process. And so it went from talking too strategic to being upfront on, okay, we're actually okay with a full acquisition. And so that was, I think, something within the team dynamics. And again, I think linking back to the personal strain we were all under, having built this thing so rapidly, that the sacrifices involved with that. And so I think that was just the personal decision of the team at the time. And so, at the end, we weren't entertaining strategic investment at the end. We were kind of, we had changed the tone of the conversation. And so, we didn't want to be comparing apples to oranges, right? At some point, you've got to pick your route and kind of go down it and just, stick with it. Otherwise, I think if you're hemming and hawing back and forth on, do I want to, they're just very different, there's very different outcomes involved, and there's pros and cons. And if you're trying to hedge too much, what's that stock quote, you can be a bull or a bear, if you're neither, you're a turkey or something like that. Like,
right. Yeah. I think I've heard something. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was definitely our mentality.
Did the founding team ever pull up during that final stage of the negotiation, when you're actually looking at letters of intent, and again, people are putting double-digit multiples of revenue in front of you? Did anybody pull up and say, hold on a second, like if they're giving us this now, what if we stayed independent for another 5 years and grew revenue by 2, 3, 4x? Like, did you guys ever have that? I know it wasn't necessarily the conversation you were having at the beginning, and your investors were happy to get that kind of money out. But did anybody kind of on the founding team pull up and say, hold on a second, guys, if we just hang tight and grow for another 2 or 3 years, this could be like unbelievable?
Yeah. And we definitely had that discussion. I mean, that was, I think one of the heuristics I had heard or read, which again is simplistic, but it's a good, good direction, is that if we take additional capital from a venture capital firm, for example, really for every dollar they put into the company, a success, like a good outcome for them, is a 10x return on that dollar. So I think we were sitting there saying, okay, geez, if we raise $50 million and we need to have a $500 million exit for it to be a quote unquote good success for that investor, are we really prepared to stick it out for that long, to grow it to the point that it's going to take? So we did math, napkin math, where we started with the end state in mind of what that would look at, and backed into it. And it was pretty unanimous that, no, we don't have the 5 to 10 years or whatever, in us to really do that. And so once you figure that out, you start to narrow down options pretty quickly at that point.
It's really great advice, because you take that outside money, you got to be in it for the long haul, right? And a lot of growth. Yeah, that's great advice for sure. Yeah, what a story! It's amazing. What kind of return were you able to give those early angel investors? Like, if I had invested $1 with you back in the early days, how much would you have given me back?
Well, they had a clause. I can't answer that specifically, but I'll put it this way: they had a clause where they got to choose either 3x their investment or the return. So they got the greater of those, and they all chose the greater of the 3x. So
Amazing. No wonder they wanted to invest in the next one. I'm going to invest in the next one.
Yeah.
Tell me about the next one, what you're doing now, because this company sounds cool.
Yeah. So Anduin.ai, we are going back to my PwC days. I've really seen an underinvestment of technology that's geared towards professional service companies. And by that, I mean accounting firms, legal firms, consulting firms. And so right now we're focused on the top 400 accounting firms building software to help them operate their business more effectively. It's the software right now is, mostly controlled by these legacy companies that have been around for 100 years, and software that they are, selling or, looks and feels like it was built, 30 years ago, because it probably was. And so I think there's a tremendous opportunity to bring modern technology to help these firms operate their business more efficiently. And certainly what we're seeing is a lot of these firms have had to go more of a remote setting because of COVID. The appetite and the desire to have modern tech to kind of operate their business off of has definitely increased.
And you just raised this, as I mentioned earlier, this big round of $14 million of VC money, I believe.
Yes.
Or
correct.
Outside. Yeah. Institutional,
Correct.
as we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, institutional. Yeah, and so for this one, the mindset is very different than the last one. The co-founding team, we're in for the long haul. We want to IPO this company and run it for next 10 years if possible. So it's a very different setup and mindset. And everything from the beginning, again, it was a strategic decision before starting it, and everything from equity distribution to funding to everything else, supporting that different strategy than what we had with the previous company.
And what's the one lesson that you took away from Digitize that you chose to do either differently or leverage that insight, that wisdom you learned from Digitize to build Anduin?
Yeah, I think my superpower, I'm not the smartest guy by any stretch of the imagination, but what I do well and what our team does really well at is figure out where there's a pain in the market and build towards that pain. Unfortunately, I think one of the things I see a lot of times with wannabe entrepreneurs is they have a great idea and then they go down and build it, and it's like, two guys in a garage, build it for 2 years and then pop their head up, kind of we talked about earlier, like if you build it, they will come.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that works. There's some great examples of that working, but if you're trying to increase your odds of success, I think building around a common pain is important. And the only way to do that is to have a lot of conversation. I mean, we had conversations with dozens of firms before we even put a line of code in software, really trying to triangulate where there's common pain. And so we did that well at Digitize, and I think we're doing that well with Anduin as well. So solving someone's problem, not just building something for the sake of building it.
I have one last question that I'm asking purely out of curiosity. You went to a very prestigious undergraduate college, and then you went to the Chicago School of Business and got an MBA, as I understand it. I was reading your LinkedIn. But so the Booth School of Business is probably one of the top 10 MBAs in the country, I would imagine. It's sort of up there.
Top 5. Yeah.
Top 5. Don't undersell it, John. Top 5. All right. Can you teach entrepreneurship?
You can teach frameworks that will increase your likelihood of success. You can't teach hustle and grind and work ethic, though. I mean, in my opinion. So I think you need both. I mean, I think you don't have to have both, but both certainly help. So if you have frameworks and mental models and pattern recognition, I think that increases your chance of success. Doesn't guarantee it, but increases it. But on the same hand, you also need all those intangibles that a university and school is not going to teach you. They may, but I started doing manual labor from the earliest ages I can remember, and my parents made me earn everything. And there's at the time when I was digging ditches and I wanted to be playing baseball, I was not happy. But I look back and I'm grateful for that now, because that work ethic was instilled.
Yeah. Well, it's great. Great answer. Great to get to know you more. Where can people find you? If Anduin's website is
anduin.ai.
.ai.
ANDIN, .ai. And then
Right.
obviously I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, and we'll put both of your profile, LinkedIn profile, and the connection to Anduin on at builttosell.com in the show notes. So, Justin, this was fun. Thank you for doing it.
Yeah, thank you, John. I appreciate it.
Hey, if you like today's episode, you're going to love my new book, The Art of Selling Your Business. The book was inspired by the cohort of my guests over the years who have been able to negotiate an exit far better than the benchmark in their industry, sometimes 2 or 3 times more than I would have expected. I was curious to understand the tactics and strategies of these entrepreneurs and what they do differently from average performers. The result is a playbook for punching above your weight when it comes to selling your business. To learn more, go to builttosell.com/selling. where we put together a collection of gifts for listeners who order the book. Just go to builttosell.com/selling. Built to Sell Radio is produced by Haley Parkhill. Our audio and video engineer is Dennis Labataglia. If you like what you've just heard, subscribe to get a new episode delivered to your inbox each week. Just go to builttosell.com.
Thanks for listening to Built to Sell Radio with John Warrillow. For complete show notes with links to additional resources, visit builttosell.com/blog. John is the founder of the Value Builder System. To find out how to improve the value of your business by 71%, visit valuebuildersystem.com. John is also the author of Built to Sell, Creating a Business That Can Thrive Without You, and The Automatic Customer, Creating a Subscription Business in Any Industry. Connect with John at facebook.com/builttosell or on Twitter at John Warrillow, WARRILLOW. Thanks for listening.